Hi, everybody. This week's topic is fluency, and I'm drawing almost exclusively from the chapter Best Practices in Fluency Instruction by Melanie Kuhn and Timothy Rosinski. Timothy Rosinski has been studying fluency for many years and has published widely on this topic. So, the first question really to answer is, what is fluency? I would suggest it consists of 2 to 3 components. Accuracy and automaticity are sometimes linked together, the accurate and the rapid recognition of words and phrases, and prosody, the proper use of the melodic features of oral language. Unlike vocabulary and comprehension, topics we're going to be tackling in the next few weeks, the assessment of fluency is relatively straightforward. Accuracy, proficiency in decoding connected text can be assessed by calculating the percentage of words read correctly on grade level material or instructional level materials. And for kids who are struggling, certainly we want to use their instructional level material. Automaticity or reading rate is simply determined by timing and calculating the number of words read correctly, again on grade level, or in our case with struggling readers, instructional level material. And the target rates, it's important to know, increase from fall to spring, and of course from grade level to grade level, and you can find them in the BRI materials. Prosody, expression, phrasing, smoothness, pace. You listen to the student read in order to assess prosody, and then you can score elements of prosody using any number of rubrics. I've used the multidimensional fluency scale. But overall, accuracy, automaticity, and prosody are relatively easy to measure, and perhaps that's part of the reason why a few years ago, 10 to 15 years ago to be specific, fluency was all the rage, because both publishers and educators and educational administrators could easily measure it. So what is the theoretical framework behind the notion of the contribution of rate and accuracy to reading comprehension? Well, in large measure, we can attribute that to LaBerge and Samuels back in the 1970s, who proposed a theory of automaticity. In other words, a practice from a cognitive processing perspective allows performance to get better and better, and Marianne Wolf talks about this in her book Proust and the Squid. When you apply that then to reading and decoding, and specifically, the notion is that skilled readers recognize individual words and groups of words more effortlessly and more automatically. That's that theory of automaticity. Much like when we're driving a car, we don't think about putting on the turn signals. We don't think about necessarily turning on the windshield wipers. We're paying attention to lane changes. We're paying attention to oncoming traffic. We're paying attention to stop signs. We're thinking about the route to our destination, etc. We can think about all these other things when the act of driving itself is automatic. And the same is what LaBerge and Samuels proposed for reading, that we can think about all these other things that have to do with understanding the text when our decoding is not taking up cognitive energy, or in particular, they were talking about attention. So beginning readers must devote attention to that which is challenging for them, which is decoding. However, skilled readers allocate limited attention to word identification, and therefore there's more cognitive processing and resource capacity for comprehension. That's the theory. Now, was it borne out in studies? Yes, it was. A number of studies looked at meaning change miscues, in other words, a measure of accuracy in reading connected text, and found not unsurprisingly, that it was related to reading comprehension. Reading rate was also related to comprehension, particularly in the early elementary grades. And over again, oral reading fluency and silent reading comprehension have found to be related. There is also evidence to suggest that prosody is related to reading comprehension. And again, there are findings from the research literature. Expressive reading contributes to comprehension over and above the contribution made by automaticity, was a finding by Benjamin et al. In 2009. However, Kuhn suggests that we be careful with this because there is probably a reciprocal relationship between prosody and comprehension. Prosody influences comprehension, but obviously comprehension also influences prosody. So what is prosody? Well, punctuation helps us understand prosody and conveys stress. For example, a couple of cartoons here. Our school's having a spring dance. I heard. Would you like to volunteer? Do they need people to decorate? No, they're just going to decorate the gym. You can wear whatever you want. I just got that. And then a second one. Now, Jerry, Tina's getting dressed for the dance. Please say something nice to her. Like what? Just say, why don't you look nice? Okay. Why don't you look nice? You're such a jerk. You can't compliment that kid. So stress conveys meaning. Punctuation also conveys meaning, and this is kind of a fun activity. Some words strung together unpunctuated. If you punctuate them one way, it suggests that Gloria would like to see John again. Give it a go. Okay, if you're not ready yet, pause the video and come back to it. But this is how you punctuate it if Gloria wants to see John again. However, what if this really is a Dear John letter and Gloria has no interest in seeing John again? Try a different punctuation. Okay, if you're not quite ready, pause and then come back when you are. Well, this is how a Dear John letter would read. So punctuation, of course, makes a tremendous difference in our writing. Stress makes a tremendous difference in our reading. What we also know about fluency is that it can get better with instruction. However, fluency instruction should not be considered just reading rate, as it is in some of the early, perhaps particularly the early fluency instructional programs. It should not just focus on rate and accuracy. It should also include prosody and then measures of comprehension. Another sort of misunderstanding is that fluency instruction is not just important for beginning readers. It's certainly critical for beginning readers, but it's also important for older readers who are having to navigate large volumes of text, as occurs in high school and in college. So some sort of fluency instruction, and we can talk a little bit about what that should look like, is important beyond the elementary years. And as I said, it's important that through fluency instruction, fluency writ broadly can improve. So there are many studies, this is from the Handbook of Reading Research, that suggests that instruction in reading fluency can indeed lead to improvements in reading fluency, accuracy, rate, and prosody. If fluency instruction didn't get the results we thought we were going to get in fluency, then there would be no reason to pursue it. But beyond that, fluency instruction also leads to improved reading comprehension and overall reading proficiency, which is often measured either through word recognition or a combination of word recognition and reading comprehension. So not only can we get differences in reading fluency, but those differences in reading fluency are important and make a difference. One of the caveats to this, however, is that Sharon Vaughn and others have suggested that reading rate does not increase in adolescence, and therefore to work on reading rate may be very unproductive. I don't know the extent to which I completely agree with that. Part of that may depend upon, again, how fluency is defined. And if it's restricted only to reading rate, then I think that she makes a good point. However, we can see that prosody, just as I said, has a correlation with reading comprehension, and in this case, silent reading comprehension, and this is for adolescents, 9th grade students. So working on prosody may very well have an effect on comprehension, prosody being one component of reading fluency. So what should effective fluency instruction look like? Well, Kuhn and Rosinski provide us with 4 principles. 1, students have opportunities to listen to models of fluent reading. Now, this can be the teacher reading out loud, this can be the whole class listening to a book on tape, or it can be individuals hooked up to a listening station, or other options as well. Very important, though, for kids to be able to listen to fluent models. Second, students are provided support while reading aloud, and this can be reading along while listening to a text, choral reading, I would add echo reading in here, and perhaps partner reading. Students learn to read in phrases, this directly related to prosody, but most important that they have opportunities to practice reading. Kuhn and Rosinski and others divide that practice reading into 2 types. One which is deep reading, repeated reading of the same text, and that goes way back to J. Samuels' work of LaBerge and Samuels, and has continued on to this day. Or wide reading, single reading of multiple texts, which was proposed most notably by Kuhn. So why the deep reading? Well, first of all, it's been very successful. And as Rosinski notes, that several reviews of research on fluency have shown that word recognition accuracy, automaticity, comprehension, and attitude toward reading improve with repeated readings. Rosinski also argues that when a student, and this applies to the students that we are working with, really struggles to read a text, when it is choppy, it lacks prosody, it lacks phrasing, they're stumbling over multiple words, that it's important for them to practice rereading that text until they can do so more automatically and more fluently. And that they in fact may need that repeated reading of the same text in order to achieve that outcome. So the repeated reading may have a lot to do with automaticity, both at the word and the phrase level, and perhaps with phrasing and prosody. Now, what Kuhn found was that students who were involved in repeated reading interventions of the same material, and students who read equivalent amounts, in other words, had this sort of the same amount of practice reading text, but spread out over different materials, made equivalent gains. And further, when she did a comparison group study, the group who read the multiple texts seemed to make gains on reading comprehension while the other group did not. So there is some evidence to suggest that wide reading may have a greater impact on comprehension. So what does this look like? Well, they present two scenarios: repeated reading, 15 to 20 minutes per session, and they're talking about repeated reading of relatively short passages, maybe up to 200 or so words. The teacher reads the text 2 or 3 times on the first day. Students echo read, students choral read, students partner read, and then they work on word study. The same text over these 5 days. Wide reading looks different. A little bit longer per episode. The teacher reads the first text to the students, and then the teacher and the students echo read, partner read. Words are selected, and then the teacher reads a second text, and the teacher reads a third text. So it's listening more to a variety of texts read fluently. So what's the answer? Well, probably a combination of both wide and deep reading using text slightly above the student's instructional level is optimal. Wide reading may be more motivating. Wide reading exposes readers to greater variety of texts and to building background knowledge and content information. And although there's some evidence that maybe wide reading has a greater influence on comprehension, struggling readers may really need to repeat read texts in order to develop their automaticity. And finally, when it comes to fluency building, one of the best ways, it can't be the only way, but a very good way to build fluency is reading for authentic purposes, authentic rehearsal and performance. So giving kids plays to read, easily differentiated according to the part you assign. Speeches. We had a student here in the lab a few years ago who prepared the Gettysburg Address for all of the other students. He was the oldest student in the lab, and it gave it an opportunity for him to perform, and it was really quite nice. Reader's theater, which is what we're talking about here, texts used for rehearsal and performance, do lead to significant improvements in fluency and overall reading. And I can attest to the fact that it is a motivating and engaging activity. So I would encourage you to include reading for authentic purposes as a part of your fluency program. And that's it on fluency.